Good evening, folks. How are you doing? I'm Conor O'Mahony, the chairperson of Ards Cross Village Community Council. You're very welcome to this seminar this evening. Just giving a few people a chance to get on here before we get into the details of it, and people are just logging on as we go here. So we'll start shortly. This is the first of several events this evening, as you'll probably be aware. This will be followed up at 8 o'clock with a great workshop by Jack Murray on how to tell a great story. And at 9 o'clock, we have the pop-up whale talk, which should be a bit of fun. And I believe that the 4 provinces is opening especially this evening in case people need to stock up on supplies to assist with their participation in the pop-up whale talk. So a full packed evening here. We've also got a number of great events tomorrow evening. There's an acting workshop with actress Gabrielle Brannock at 7 o'clock. You have to register in advance for that. I don't know if the space is left for that one. At 8 o'clock, we have a fantastic interview with Judith Mock being conducted by Professor John Horn. That should be a great event. And several more great events for the rest of the week. But this event is about the Liberties. We will all be very familiar with the area in a little bit towards town, but the origins of the name and the history of the area and something is that there's a lot of interesting information around the background to that. And I'm delighted that we have local historian and tour guide Eoin Bairéad, who is going to very shortly come on board and fill you in on all of the background to that and all of the details. And I'm sure it will be an excellent and riveting presentation, as always, from Eoin. So delighted to welcome Eoin, delighted to welcome all our guests this evening who are watching this. So enjoy, and hopefully we'll see you at some more of the events. Over to you, Eoin.
Now you can hear me, I hope. The host unmuted me. Right. I'm Conor O'Mahony. Can you see my screen where were the Liberties with Bang Bang?
You can see you, yeah. Yeah, all good.
Okay. Right. It has long been a badge of honour for the true Dubliner that they, and all belonging to them, came from the Liberties. Many would have a good idea of what was meant by a liberty. But in spite of what Conor says, a grasp of the geographical extent of these famous districts is not at all as extensive or as accurate. Firstly, what was a liberty? One could do far worse than quote from Burns' Dictionary of Irish Local History. It was a civil jurisdiction, such as a manor, granted by the Crown and independent of the county sheriff and of the royal courts. Here could be found a lord, courts, an administration, and even an army. The great liberties or franchises were administered by a person, always a man, called a seneschal. In Dublin, there were 7 such liberties. A very large one, a not so large one, 2 small ones, a forgotten one, and an ignored one. The Lord was the ultimate authority in the liberty, and Jonathan Swift, Dean of St. Patrick's, was one such. In a letter to the Pope, he describes his authority. I am one of the governors of all the hackney coaches, carts and carriages round this town, who dare not insult me like your rascally waggoners or coachmen, but give me the way. Nor is there one lord or squire for 100 of yours to turn me out of the road. I am the absolute lord of the greatest cathedral in the kingdom. I am at peace with the neighbouring princes, the Lord Mayor of the city, the Archbishop of Dublin. Only the latter, like the King of France, sometimes attempts encroachments on my dominion, as old Louis XIV did upon Lorraine. The Liberty Court was effectively a district court, and its name reflected that title. The title was of obscure origin, but perhaps from an Anglo-Saxon word. They were called courts leet. The seneschal was the officer in charge of justice and control of the administration in the liberty. It will be seen that the name manor was often applied synonymously with liberty. it will be seen that a liberty could encompass several manors. And technically, a manor was a unit of rural territorial organization, especially a unit in the Middle Ages, consisting of an estate under a lord, enjoying a variety of rights over land, and tenants, including the right to hold court. However, by the 19th century, it had become obvious to the House of Commons that these medieval institutions were no longer suitable for local administration, either in Ireland or in the rest of the United Kingdom. And so, over a few years, the perceived anachronisms of rotten boroughs, ruled by guilds, and liberties needed to be replaced by more modern institutions, more suitable for and in tune with the modern age. To properly manage that transition, in 1836, that date is important, and in 1837, that date is important, the House of Commons established a number of select committees charged with coming up with the efficient procedures for replacing the old bodies. As a preliminary part of this exercise, they called witnesses who described the nature and the extent of these medieval organizations. And finally, the Manor Courts Abolition Ireland Act of 1859, over 20 years later, transferred jurisdiction to the then Petty Sessions Courts. And it is from the reports of these committees that we get much of the exact information about the liberties. We will start with the largest of the Dublin liberties. In March 1172, Henry II came to Dublin as much to curtail Strongbow and the other Norman lords as to exercise authority over his newly acquired territories. But before he departed, he commanded the government of Dublin to Hugh de Lacy, Robert Fitzstephen, and Maurice Fitzgerald, having first granted to the city by charter to the men of Bristol, the city of Dublin, with all its liberties and free customs, which the men of Bristol do now enjoy at Bristol and through my whole land. The liberty was the liberty of the city of Dublin. And in a grant made to St. Mary's Abbey, made by John when he became Lord of Ireland in 1177, and before the death of Hugh de Lacy, the seneschal of the liberty of Dublin was Bertram de Verdun. Since he came to Dublin with Henry, it's likely that he was in that position since the liberty was granted. You can see the liberty of Dublin. It went from Ballybock Bridge all the way over to Kilmainham and all the way down to Mount Merrion. That was the liberty of Dublin. Around Dublin, there were other areas enjoying similar independence from the authority of the city. All originated in ecclesiastical jurisdictions. The abbeys of Kilmainham, of St. Thomas and St. Mary, the districts controlled by the cathedrals, Christchurch and St. Patrick's, and the lands controlled by the Archbishop. 4 of these were in part at least within the limits of the city, but all are so connected to the city that we may consider them together. The districts over which these local jurisdictions extend are called liberties or manors. They are the liberty of St. Sepulchre, the liberty of our manor of Thomas Court and Donore, the liberty of the deanery of St. Patrick, the manor of Glasnevin or Grange Gorman, the liberty of Christchurch, the manor of Kilmainham, and the manor of St. Mary's Abbey. The first 2, St. Sepulchre and Thomas Court and Donore, are sometimes called today the liberties. These jurisdictions originated in grants from the Crown to the respective lords of the manors or districts which they comprised. There is a common thread of administration running through all of them, and only one will be described in detail, with particular variations being described as they occur. Firstly, we will consider the biggest liberty of all, the liberty of St. Sepulchre, and the most important liberty. There it is, the liberty of St. Sepulchre. It starts up there at Kevin Street Garda Station, goes down, crossing Georgia Street, going at the back of Stephen's Green, down, crossing the canal, down to Morehampton Road, going in by the Royal Hospital, down to the Dodder, and way down along the Dodder until we come to Rascar, coming up that way, up through Rascar and Harold's Cross, and back to Kevin Street Garda Station. Notice that this liberty includes Renla and includes Rathmines and includes a chunk of Harold's Cross and a little chunk of Milltown down here at the bottom. So this, and Collinswood being the old word, old name for the big bit of Ranelagh. So this is not a liberty confined to the heart of the city. The liberty itself had 8 manors, some of which were a considerable distance from Dublin. There was the manor of St. Sepulchre itself, the manor of Talla, the manor of Rathcoole and Clondalkin, the manor of Shankill, the manor of Ballymore Eustace, the manor of Castle Kevin in Wicklow, the manor of Swords, and the manor of Finglas. The manor of St. Sepulchre was centred on the Archbishop's Palace, now Kevin Street Garda Station, while it mostly lay outside the city boundaries. By a statute of George III, that part north of the South Circular Road was made into a barony, the barony of St. Sepulchre. It comprised part of the parish of St. Peter's, all of the parish of Nicholas Without, and that's important, and the old parish of St. Kevin. Until the Reformation, the old parish of St. Patrick formed part of the liberty of St. Sepulchre, but in 1555, a charter of the joint monarchs, Mary and Philip, restored the cathedral as a collegiate church. For a period, Patrick's was not a cathedral. Philip and Mary made it into a collegiate again, and the new liberty, the liberty of the Dean and Chapter of Christ Church of the Cathedral of St. Patrick, was created. The boundary of the manor of St. Sepulchre ran from the corner of Kevin Street, along Bride Street, the Garda Station, across Bishop Street, with the Department of Social Welfare on the right, onto Redmond's Hill, and again only the right side was in the liberty, over down Protestant Row, the old side down Protestant Row. The old passage is built over, but the property line can still be seen. Harcourt Street, along the back of the houses on Stephen's Green, skirting Ivy Gardens, to within 2 doors of Hatch Street, along Leeson Street to Leeson Close, crossing the street and running along the eastern side of Hamilton House. That's that very big house on Leeson Street Bridge that looks different to all the others. That's because it was not in the liberty. Across Fitzwilliam Street, follow the boundary of the large building on that side, the Bank of Ireland Group, over the canal, down Sussex Road. The liberty boundary now runs along Morehampton Road, crosses Wellington Road, leaves the city and enters the county of Dublin. As an aside, note a little plaque to your right, because where the liberty crosses Morehampton Road, there's a little bit of land there which is totally wild. There are lovely houses along here. There is nothing here. That's because of what you see here, the parliamentary boundary. And the gentleman who developed the houses along here knew that if he crossed that boundary, the houses would have to pay rents, and he did not want that. The River Swan is the boundary. That land is now owned by Antashka, the daughter of the builder, Miss Kathleen Goodfellow, gave the land to Antashka in 1979. The Liberty swings right here, following the own line of the Swan Water. Along the northern edge of the Royal Hospital, Donnybrook, always respected by property boundaries, even to this day. The residents of Cullenwoods Park on the right are not in the Liberty. The neighbours on the left on Sallymount Park are in the Liberty. Left to Milltown, along the River Dodder to Rothgar Lane, now called Orwell Road, to Rathfarnham Road, Kimmage Road, where it meets the Liberty up the north, down Harold's Cross to New Street, the western left hand of Harold's Cross being the boundary with the north, then Cross Pottle, now Dean Street, along the North Street, along Francis Street, remember that, along Francis Street, to within a few doors of Thomas Street, and right to the part of Cutthroat Row, now a small stretch of Corn Market between Francis Street and Lamb Alley, along the back of Back Lane, including the Black Ball, the Back Lane Market, Mother Redcaps to the older ones amongst you, along the rear of some houses in Parliament Street, including about half of Bull Alley, the rear of more houses in Patrick Street, along the remainder of Patrick Street towards the Cathedral to Kevin Street, skirting the Cathedral in a most complex fashion, which we will see, until it entered Bride Street, opposite Peter Street, along Bride Street until the north corner of Bishop Street and the Garda Station. The skirting of St. Patrick's Cathedral meant that all the liberty of the deanery of St. Patrick's was surrounded by the liberty of St. Sepulchre. At dissolution, the property had and the population was estimated at 50,000, and they were subject to the jurisdiction of the Seneschal, whose courthouse still stands today. There it is on the corner of Bride Street and Malpa Street, opposite to entrance to what used to be the Meath Hospital and is now something else. Anyway, just to show how tricky it was to run a liberty, King Richard II, by letters patent dated in Kilkenny, 5th of April, 1395, listed the rights of the Archbishop of Dublin in his liberty. And there they were, sock and sack, toy and tera, in fang def and out fang def, pleased to more Tominus, and so on, down to the very end to have day, year, and waste. Not easily followed. Right. The next liberty was the one which most people would consider one of the true liberties of Dublin, the liberty of Thomas Court and the Manor of Donore. It was situated within the city of Dublin and partly within the county of Dublin. Thomas Court is within the city, but Donore on the south, crossing over the canal, has a huge chunk in the county, of which it was made a separate barony by George III, as we already mentioned. The nucleus of this abbey was a church to St. Thomas a Becket, founded in 1177 by William Fitzalan, Dapifer, that means he dressed him, as well as kinsman of Henry II, whom the king sent over to Ireland as his deputy. And in 1178, the next year, the king granted the abbey and a carcerate of land called Donore, with mill and meadows, etc., for the health of the souls of his father and mother and ancestors, his own and his sons. The reason for the souls was that, as you will be aware, Henry had just murdered Thomas a Becket. 2 years later, it was given 7 churches and estates in Lismore in Waterford, Dungarvan in Waterford, Cork, and a considerable property in Bray. In 1538, Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries, and their possessions were distributed, along with several people, of whom Sir William Brabazon, ancestor of the Earls of Meath, who are there to this day, and Richard St. Leger were the major beneficiaries. On the 31st of March, 1545, Sir William Brabazon was granted the lands of the abbey with all jurisdictions, liberties, privileges, and so on. In 1579, the city of Dublin claimed the abbey to be within the jurisdiction and liberty of the city, but they lost that case. From there on in, the liberty was the liberty of the Earl of Meath. The liberty comprised the greater part of St. Catherine's Parish, the centre of St. Luke's Parish, including within the limits upwards of 40 streets and lanes in the city of Dublin, and about 22,000 of its poorest inhabitants in 1837. Now, the courts leet were held before the Seneschal at Easter and Michaelmas. The courthouse, which was located in Thomas Court Bawn, was used as a church in the 1760s while St. Catherine's was being renovated, was used as a Sunday school. In 1809, the Seneschal was the historian James Whitelaw, who wrote a marvellous history of Dublin with 2 others. He was also vicar of St. Catherine's. The building fell into decay, as you can see, and in the latter part of the century, it was demolished in 1897. The jail was in Marylebone Lane. Now, here are the following streets and parts of streets which were stated in the Manor of Thomas Court. It's in the Cuam, spelt that way because that's the way they say it. Cole Alley, Elbow Lane, Engine Alley, also called Indian Alley, and I think that was the original name, but no one can tell. Then the Coombe north from Ash Street to Pimlico, and in the Manor of Donore, the Coombe south from a certain boundary on Crossbottle to RD Street, then Skinner's Row, Fordham's Alley, Brabazon Street, and so on. Francis Street is important, and this is a grotty map, but I'll show you a better one in the middle, but you can see a city boundary running along there. Here is a better map. This is Francis Street and the parish of St. Nicholas. And you can see here the boundary for the Liberty, and it comes down and across. But there's a huge chunk here which is in the Liberty of the city. That was the Liberty boundary, and it ran down the middle of Francis Street until the Coombe. So all this side of Francis Street were in the Liberty of St. Sepulchre, and all this side of Francis Street until you get to here were in the Liberty of the city of Dublin. The Liberty of the Nore started here in Pym Street, as we said. So for all their claim to be the heart of the rel of the Liberties, half of Francis Street and a quarter of the Coombe were in the Liberty of the City of Dublin, along with such Dublin heartlands as Trinity College, Sandymount, Donnybrook and Ballsbridge. By the way, if this gets out to Francis Street and the Coombe, I am in trouble, so be discreet, please. The next liberty we come to is the liberty of the Dean and Chapter of St. Patrick. And it was a small and slightly compacted district, partly within the city boundaries and partly outside. It once formed part of the Liberty of St. Sepulchre. It was previously the parish of St. Patrick and was made, they say, erected into a separate liberty and a collegiate church at a very remote period. It is known as the Liberty of St. Patrick's Close, the precinct or close of St. Patrick's Cathedral, but most people call it the Dean's Liberty. It comprised of the Cathedral Church, part of Patrick Street, 3/4 of Patrick's Park up here, and turn left and go straight down to the Baine, which was down there, covered, which is still there to this day, the Liberties Business Centre and Education Centre. And along now vanished streets called Walker's Alley, Goodman's Alley, Glendalough Alley, Myler's Alley, Petty Cannon Alley, and then down to Bride Street, opposite Pierce Street, where the Liberty of St. Sepulchre ends. And the house of the corner of Bull Alley, part of this house was in the city and part in the Dean's Liberty, the shop being divided by the boundary line, and then down Kevin Street to Patrick Street. The lands on the south side of Kevin Street, including the Cabbage Garden, were in the Liberty, as was a narrow strip of land running from Patrick Street west into the Liberty of the City of Dublin, and I have not a clue why that was there, but it was. There's the City Liberty, and there inside is the prebendary of Clonmethan, part of the Liberty of St. Patrick's. Clonmethan is between Ashbourne and Lusk in North County Dublin. In 1840, there were fewer than 24 good houses in the entire deanery, and the whole extent was only about 5 acres. Until 1832, the grand jury of the court were summoned by the seneschal and regularly met to tax the inhabitants. However, there still was a seneschal. His name was J.D. Clark, and as was standard, he was a barrister and received a salary from the dean and the chapter of £10 per annum. Remember that, that's important, although he had no duties to perform as seneschal. The next big liberty is one of the tiniest. It's the Liberty of Christchurch, but it includes the Manor of Glasnevin and either or the Manor of Grangegorman. Paradoxically, it was the smallest of the liberties, but all its associated manors, particularly in Glasnevin and Grangegorman, made it among the wealthiest. The Liberty owned a considerable portion of Dublin between the canals, north and south. North of the Liffey, it included the whole of the wealthy and populous parish of St. George, the entire parish of Grangegorman, all of Lisborough, the entire parish of Glasnevin, much of the barony of Coolock, including the villages of Howth, Baldoyle, Raheny, Artane, Clontarf, Richmond, Drumcondra, Santry, Clough-Gran and St. Margaret's, as well as the entire barony of Castleknock, the village of Blanchardstown, and to the south of the river, the villages fast developing in tandem with the railway of Kingstown, Dunleera, Killiney, Dalkey, Stillorgan, and other hamlets and villages as far away as Bray, as well as all of Rathmines, even though that was in a different liberty, fast becoming the district of choice for wealthy Dublin classes. It included at least the seneschal said it included the entire barony of Rathdown. It must be stated when asked for proof, the seneschal was unable to provide any, but his claim was not challenged. Ominously too, the House of Commons committee winding up the liberties stated it comprehends the baronies of Coolock, Castleknock and Rathdown, the manors of Kingstown, Glasnevin and Grangegorman, situate within the county of Dublin, and also, wait for it, the lordship of St. Mary's Abbey, which comprises a great portion of the city and county of the city of Dublin. We shall see more of this presently. The Lords of the Liberty were the Dean and Chapter of Christchurch, and as the Liberty itself is described, it is basically the footpath around Christchurch, Christchurch Cathedral, Christchurch Place, John's Lane and St. Michael's Hill. That was it. It did not include St. Michael's, it did not include St. Nicholas Inn, but it included 4 little things here. That's a place marked Exchequer, a place marked King's Bench, a place marked Common Pleas, and a place marked Chancery. There are 4 of them. They are courts, and together they are called the Four Courts. So the 4 courts were located within Christchurch Cathedral. Right, the Manor of Kilmainham. Bad map because I couldn't get a good one, but basically it was all of the barony of Newcastle. There you go, that lot. And it went in as far as James's Street. It included Guinness's. It's the least known of the Dublin Liberties. It embraced Irwin Street, James's Street, and other minor streets between the boundaries of the city and South Circular Road. No portion of it was within the city, but it was not small. The jurisdiction of this court extends over the barony of Newcastle, and that barony comprised the parishes of Derry, Clondalkin, Esker, Kilbride, Kilmacthalway, Kilmahuderick, Leixlip, Lucan, Newcastle, and Rathcoole, 23,000 acres of excellent land. The Lord of the Manor of Kilmainham was called the chairman, and in 1800, a rather Falstaffian figure called John Bully Egan, who fiercely opposed the union. In the final debate of the Irish Parliament, after delivering a strong speech of condemnation, he is said to have exclaimed after sitting down, "Ireland, Ireland forever, and damn Kilmainham." With the act passing, he was indeed deprived of the chairmanship. At the time of the dissolution of the Liberties, Lord Cloncurry was the chairman. The seneschal was John Finlay, an assistant barrister for the county of Leitrim. The court of the Manor of Kilmainham was still in use until very recently. It's the courthouse beside Kilmainham Jail. And that building is now, I think, part of the Kilmainham Jail. Excellent visitor where visitors go. Right. Now the hard one. The Manor of St. Mary's. In the calendar of the Liber Aldus for 1488, Thomas Myler, Mayor, William English and Robert Boyes, bailiffs, and the aldermen and commons of the city of Dublin did what they did every year on the 4th of September. They rode out to Merrion and then back along the city liberty boundaries to Kilmainham, crossed the river, respecting as they did the liberties of Kilmainham and Christchurch, until they came to a stop where the charter makes mention where the gallows were of old time, betwixt the Abbey of St. Mary, the Abbot of St. Mary's Abbey, and the land on the east side, and the Prior of Christchurch lands on the west side, and then went northward and eastward to the River Talca by the bridge at Ballybocht, and then back along the river to St. Mary's Abbey. Here, the Abbot of St. Mary's Abbey protested that they should not have ridden west of the Abbey, and so forth to the sea, which the mayor and his brethren denied. So in 1488, the liberty of St. Mary was to be respected. In 1603, however, Mayor John Tyrrell, with the sheriffs, recorder, and aldermen, accompanied with 300 horse and citizens, rode the same franchises. This time there was no mention of the Abbey or the Liberty. The 1836 Commons Committee report states that there was formerly a sixth Liberty, the Manor of St. Mary's Abbey, but the exercise of all manorial jurisdiction therein has long ceased. Uniquely, it had disappeared, and with it all the vast number of manors over which it had jurisdiction. But it hadn't, because the very next year, in 1837, the next House of Commons Select Committee was established to consider the Irish manors, and on May the 18th day of that year, they examined Henry Cole, Esquire. Question: are you a barrister? I am. I'm Henry Cole, Esquire. Of what manor are you seneschal? I am seneschal of the manor called the Manor of Grangegorman in the county of Dublin. I am also seneschal of the manor of Kingstown. I am also seneschal of the manor of St. Mary's Abbey. Who are the lords of these respective manors? The lords of the manager of Grangegorman are the Dean and Chapter of Christchurch. The lords of the manor of Kingstown are Lord de Vesey and Lady Longford. And of the other, Lady Harriet D'Orsay of Blessington Estate is the lord of the manor of St. Mary's. Harriet D'Orsay was born Harriet Gardner. Her grandfather was Luke Gardner, 1st Viscount Mountjoy, owner of vast estates in North Dublin City, who was killed at the Battle of Ross in 1798. And now a little aside, which is not on my list at all. When they were building the new custom house, John Beresford was the man in charge of choosing a place. And he did not choose a place in the commercial heart of the city up near Capel Street. No, he moved way, way out to the east to Slobland, where the custom house today. Another gentleman had bought huge quantities of land behind him and built it up. The other gentleman was his brother-in-law, Luke Gardner Sr. Now, was there any connection between the two, you might ask? I don't know. Anyway, Luke Gardner Sr., his son Luke Gardner Jr. was killed at the Battle of Ross. And after the dissolution of the monasteries in 1739, the lands of St. Mary's Abbey were divided. The Grange and Lordship were given in fairly quick succession to the Earl of Desmond and the clerk of the check of the armies and garrisons in Ireland. But on the expiry of the King's lease, Sir Gerard Moore, as in Moore Street, received from Jane a grant of the abbey together with his tithes and lands and privileges. He became Lord Moore, Viscount Moore of Mellifont. And the Moore family made the abbey their Dublin residence up to the 17th century, and it was Henry Moore, first Earl of Drogheda, who built himself a mansion on what was now O'Connell Street, and developed Henry Street, Earl Street, and Drogheda Street. He had Henry Street, he had Moore Street, he had Earl Street, he had Drogheda Street. There was only one element of his name what he left out. The little lane opposite the side entrance to the GPO he called Of Lane, giving Henry Moore, Earl of Drogheda. The Gardner papers in the National Library show a transfer of the Lordship of St. Mary's Abbey and the Grange of Clonliffe for £16,000 from the Right Honourable Edward Moore, Earl of Drogheda, to the Right Honourable Brabazon, 1st Viscount Duncannon, and Luke Gardner Dublin. The following year, there was a conveyance of his moiety of the Lordship to by Brabazon to Luke Gardner. So Luke Gardner ended up with the lot. Now, Luke's grandson, son of Luke, who was killed in Ross, was Charles John Gardner, Earl of Blessington, and he was a rake. And Mrs. Gardner, his missus, was a rakeette. And they were in London being rakes. And they met a French gentleman called the Alfred Comte d'Orsay. And at least one of the happy couple, at least one, became extremely fond of Alfred Comte d'Orsay. But even in Victorian England, a happy trio like that, Mr. and Mrs. Gardner and Alfred Comte d'Orsay, couldn't traipse around together. And they got round the problem of traipsing around together by marrying their daughter, Harriet, to the Comte d'Orsay. And Harriet Gardner became Countess d'Orsay. When her father died, her mother and her husband moved into England and left there together. And she was there as nothing else except the heiress to her dad, Charles Gardner. And when Henry Cole discovered that the Liberty of Mary's was effectively vacant, and therefore both the manors of the north side in Grange Gormans, Asnevan, and that of Kingstown to the south were without a seneschal, and aware that the manors could be dissolved, with compensation payable to dispossessed office holders, he wrote to the lords and offered his services, and they were accepted. Now, the question of where exactly the liberty is problematic, as so little of its jurisdiction has survived. But what we certainly know is let's start at the top. This is the Stony Batter. This is Bolton Street. And this is Parnell Street all the way out to Ballybough Bridge and down to Fairview. And all of this land was owned by the St. Mary's Abbey in the Grange of Clonliffe. So if anyone asks you what's the connection between the Musée d'Orsay and Gardner Street, you can now tell them it was a rake and his daughter. One strange thing in the Liberty of St. Mary's is this bump to the north. The boundary seems to have followed the course of the Braddock River from Constitution Hill towards the King's Inns and down past Henrietta Street to where it met the road to Trishogue or Santry, which is now Bolton Street, Dorset Street from Condor Hill, and proceeded to the Abbey Green. In 1697, the former lands of St. Mary's Abbey were separated from St. Michael's Parish to form the parish of St. Mary. In 1749, St. Mary's was subdivided, the parish of St. Thomas being formed of its eastern division. These were the new Church of Ireland parishes in Dublin. Finally, in 1793, that part of St. Mary's that lay outside the Liberties of Dublin was detached from the rest, and together with small part of the parish of Glasnevin lying south of the Tolka, was formed into the parish of St. George. Excuse me. None of these parishes are there today. The only Church of Ireland parish north of the river is St. Michael's. Now, if we look at Speed's map, we see a wall marking the boundary of the abbey as well to the east. And if we look again at the map of the city Liberty, we see a large bump around Broadstone, coming down Parnell Square before heading out Summerhill to the Tolka, as I said earlier. And if we remember that the Earl of Drogheda built his new 17th century mansion in Drogheda, later O'Connell Street, I think the layout might be considered straight up from Halston Street, around the bump, and then excuse me, following St. Mary's Parish down Parnell Square to the river at O'Connell Bridge. A small manor, a small liberty, but with huge lands out to the outside. This little lane here, by the way, which is incredibly important, is Abbey Street Old. Still there. The Abbey Theatre is there. And it's a handy way on a bicycle to get from Custom House to Capel Street. Right. Okay, the end of the Liberties. In 1837, the House of Commons appointed a select committee to inquire into the operation of the manor courts, to consider the abuses which may exist therein and the remedies that should be applied in ending these abuses. Having detailed the origin, nature, and practice of these several manorial jurisdictions, so far as they related to the municipal authority of Dublin as actually exercised, the committee concluded by submitting a few general remarks on them. They were all remnants of a feudal world in which they originated, the object of which was to make a powerful individual or ecclesiastical corporation responsible for the good order of the particular district, which was their private property, and for which purpose it became necessary to invest those individuals or corporate bodies with the extraordinary powers which they possessed under their charters, and any encroachment on them seems to have been carefully guarded against in the subsequent grants of the Crown to the city. From the earliest period to which records reached, the jurisdictions were productive of jealousies and perpetual hostility. As a result of these topographical divisions, whether for the purpose of taxation, local government, or the administration of justice, they were both incongruous and inconvenient. The committee had no hesitation in saying that it was desirable that in any new arrangement of the municipal authority of the city of Dublin, these local jurisdictions should be either abolished or put on a totally different footing. And then they conclude, under such regulations, the collisions of authority which now disgrace the city would no longer ensue, and the burdens of taxation which now press unequally on different parts would be equalized. The administration of justice to the poor would be placed in the hands of competent and responsible tribunals, and a uniform system of local government would be established in this large metropole. The last of the liberties to be abolished was the liberty of St. Sepulchre. Sorry, the first liberty to be abolished was the liberty of St. Sepulchre in 1856. 3 years later, all the other liberties followed into extinction. And as Mr. Cole had foreseen, the officials got and claimed and got compensation. But where are the liberties? Well, after 1859, they're not anywhere. And before 1856, if we look at the manors attached to each of the 7 liberties, manors that go from the far north of the country to the far south of the country, before 1856, if your mammy was born pretty much anywhere between Bangor and Bantry, there was a fairly good choice that she was, as she had always claimed to be, a Liberty Belle. So thank you for staying with me. I now hand you back to our esteemed chairman. I'll stop there. You're on mute. No, you're not.
Not anymore. Oh, thanks. Thanks for that, Owen. That's really interesting. Just before I check to see if any of our attendees would like to ask a question, the one sort of burning question, I suppose, is most people think of the Liberties as being that space more or less between the Coombe and Thomas Street, and that they've sort of proclaimed the title just for that fairly limited area. Given what you've just said, it's clearly a very broad, very much broader area than that was the historical Liberties. Why would the name have come down so much in that small area?
Well, what it is the city part of the Liberty of St. Sepulchre and the Liberty of St. Thomas, and probably not even the Manor of Dunor, because that goes too far south of the canal. So, and there was never a central administration covering just those areas and no others. There you go. Between the Billy Mulligan, the pride of the Coombe, and her daughter, the locals seem to have it fairly well covered at this stage, and who am I to disagree with them? Apart from in forums such as the Harold's Cross Community Festival.
There's a message there from Amanda, Bell, and Patrick, who are watching it, and they've just said that they found it very, very interesting. Thank you for that.
Thank you both.
If any of the other attendees got any questions or anything else for Owen? If not, we'll call it quits there, and it just remains for me to thank Owen very much for a really interesting presentation. I knew the Liberties was a bit more than just that small area, but I wasn't aware of the full extent of it or the history to it. So that was a really interesting presentation. So thanks very much, Owen. That was great. Another great event on our schedule. So thanks very much. So that ends tonight's presentation, folks. For this event, obviously, in another just over 15 minutes, there'll be another very interesting workshop with Jack Murray. Jack is obviously a fantastic communicator and media person, PR expert, all of those good things, and is going to share some of his knowledge in terms of how to tell stories. So I think that'll be a really interesting presentation at 8 o'clock. So hopefully we might see some of you there as well. So other than that, good night, and enjoy the rest of the festival. Good night.